The linoleum floor of Seattle Grace Hospital's emergency room was a particular shade of institutional gray, a color that had been chosen by some committee decades ago, probably for its ability to hide stains. Harper Gallagher knew that floor intimately. She knew every scuff mark, every discolored tile, every slight depression where countless gurneys had rolled over the same path for years. She knew it because she spent most of her 12-hour night shifts staring at it. The mop handle was slick with moisture as Harper pushed it across the corridor outside Trauma Bay 3. The clock on the wall read 2:17 in the morning, the witching hour of the hospital when the chaos of the day shift had long since faded and only the stubborn cases remained. The chronic alcoholics, the frequent flyers with their nebulous complaints, the genuinely desperate who had nowhere else to turn. Harper was 58 years old. Her left leg ached with a deep, persistent throb that no amount of ibuprofen could fully silence. The limp was pronounced tonight. It always got worse when the weather changed, and Seattle's October rain had been hammering the city for 3 days straight. She wore the same navy blue scrubs as the other nurses, but hers were different, faded from too many washings. A small bleach stain on the left thigh from a spill 2 months ago. Her name tag read simply H. Gallagher R.N. in letters that had started to peel at the edges. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay hissed open. Harper glanced up from her mopping, a habit she couldn't break. Always assess, always be ready. The cold October air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. Dr. Marcus Sterling entered like a prince returning to his castle. He was 33 years old and looked like he'd been designed by a committee tasked with creating the perfect trauma surgeon. 6 feet tall, athletic build, maintained by a personal trainer 3 times a week. Dark hair styled with product that cost more than Harper made in a day. A jawline that could have sold watches in a magazine. He wore his white coat like armor, pristine, and pressed with his name embroidered in navy blue thread, Dr. Marcus Sterling, M.D., F.A., C.S., Trauma Surgery. Behind the letters were the words no one needed to say, but everyone knew, son of Senator Richard Sterling, heir apparent to untouchable. He was on his phone laughing at something, not watching where he walked. Harper saw it coming. She pulled the mop bucket closer to the wall, trying to move it out of the path. But her left leg betrayed her. The shift in weight made her stumble slightly, and the bucket stayed exactly where it was. Dr. Sterling's Italian leather shoe caught the edge of the yellow mop bucket. Water sloshed over the side, splashing across the floor in a gray wave. He jerked back, the smile dying on his face. "Jesus Christ," he snapped, ending his phone call with a quick tap. "Watch where you put that thing." Harper straightened her hand instinctively, going to the small of her back, where the scar tissue always tightened when she moved wrong. "I'm sorry, doctor. I was moving it out of my way, cleaning lady." Sterling cut her off, his eyes not quite meeting hers. He was already looking past her, scanning the emergency room for someone more important. "This is a hospital, not a janitor's closet. Keep your equipment where it belongs." "I'm a registered nurse, Dr. Sterling." Harper's voice was quiet but steady. She'd said these words before, many times. He finally looked at her then, really looked. His eyes traveled from her graying hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, to her faded scrubs, to her institutional white sneakers that had long since lost their brightness. His lip curled ever so slightly. "You're just a nurse," he said, emphasizing the word like it was an insult. "Nurses clean, doctors save lives. I suggest you learn the difference and stay in your lane." He stepped around the spilled water, his phone already back to his ear, his laugh returning as he disappeared into the physician's lounge. Harper stood there for a moment, her hand still on the mop handle. She didn't move, didn't react. She'd learned a long time ago that reactions only made things worse. From the nurse's station, 15 feet away, Reagan McCoy watched the entire exchange. She was 28 years old, with red hair pulled into a high ponytail, and a face full of freckles that made her look even younger than she was. She'd been at Seattle Grace for 3 years, and had seen this scene play out more times than she could count. Regan caught Harper's eye and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Harper just shook her head slightly and went back to mopping up the spill. There was nothing to say. Nothing that would change anything. The thing that no one knew, the thing Harper had buried so deep that sometimes even she forgot it, was that she had once been responsible for ending Dr. Marcus Sterling's military career. Not directly, not maliciously. But 12 years ago, when Marcus Sterling was a 21-year-old medical student in the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, he'd attempted a procedure he wasn't qualified to perform, a central line insertion on a training mannequin that he'd done without proper supervision. When the scenario shifted to a real patient simulation, he'd frozen, panicked, nearly killed the simulated patient through sheer arrogance and unpreparedness. Harper, then a lieutenant commander and senior instructor at the Naval Medical Training Center, had written the incident report. Professional, factual, devastating. Sterling had washed out of the Navy medical program 3 months later. Too arrogant, the final evaluation said. Unable to follow protocols, a danger to his unit in combat conditions. It had destroyed his dream of becoming a military surgeon like his father had been. He'd blamed everyone but himself. And when he'd seen Harper Gallagher's name on an employment application to Seattle Grace 7 years ago, he'd recognized it immediately. He'd made sure she was hired for the lowest position available, night shift, mostly cleaning duties. As close to a janitor as a registered nurse could be. Maximum humiliation for the woman who'd ruined his life. Harper had never confronted him about it, had never mentioned that she knew, had simply shown up for every shift, done her work, and kept her head down. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the universe had decided it was time for accounts to be settled. The call came in at 2:47 in the morning. Harper was restocking the supply closet in Trauma Bay 2 when she heard the radio crackle to life at the nurse's station. She'd learned to filter the constant chatter, but certain words always cut through. Seattle Grace, this is Medic 17. We're inbound with multiple critical from an I-5 pileup, ETA 6 minutes. We've got a 17-year-old male unrestrained driver, significant chest trauma. Vitals are deteriorating. Harper's hand stilled on the box of 4x4 gauze pads she'd been shelving. Reagan's voice responded on the radio. Copy Medic 17. Trauma bays are being prepped. How many total? We've got 5 ambulances inbound, 7 patients total. Your 17-year-old is the critical one. Decreased breath sounds on the right. Tachycardic, tachypneic. We're bagging him now, but he's fighting it. Harper closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see the patient without seeing him. 17 years old. Unrestrained driver meant he'd taken the full force of the impact. Significant chest trauma. Decreased breath sounds on the right side. Tachycardic meant his heart was racing, trying to compensate. Tachypneic meant rapid breathing, his body desperately trying to get oxygen. The clinical picture formed in her mind with perfect clarity, tension, pneumothorax. The right lung had collapsed, probably from a broken rib puncturing the pleural space. Air was filling the chest cavity, compressing the lung, pushing the heart and major vessels to the left. With each breath, more air trapped itself in the chest, more pressure built. Soon, very soon, that pressure would be so great that the heart couldn't fill with blood. Cardiac arrest would follow in minutes. The treatment was simple. A needle, 14 gauge, second intercostal space mid-clavicular line. Insert, release the pressure, buy time for a chest tube. Simple, quick, life-saving. Harper opened her eyes and walked out of the supply closet. The emergency room had transformed. The night shift lethargy had evaporated, replaced by controlled chaos. Nurses were pulling equipment. Residents were gowning up. The trauma team was assembling, but Dr. Marcus Sterling was not among them. Harper scanned the room and found him in the physician's lounge, visible through the glass door. He was sitting on the leather couch, his feet up on the coffee table, watching something on his phone. A pharmaceutical representative sat next to him, a young woman in an expensive suit who laughed at something Sterling said. The ambulances arrived 4 minutes later. The first through the door was the 17-year-old boy. Harper saw him from across the room, and every alarm bell in her head went off at once. His skin was the wrong color, not pale, not white, but a shade of dusky blue-gray that meant oxygen deprivation. His chest was moving, but the movement was all wrong, rapid, shallow, desperate. His neck veins were distended, bulging against his skin like ropes. His eyes were wide with panic, the animal terror of someone who knows they're dying but doesn't understand why. The paramedics were bagging him, squeezing oxygen into his lungs with a manual resuscitator. But Harper could see it wasn't working. She could see the tracheal deviation, the slight shift of his windpipe to the left side of his neck. Tension, pneumothorax, advanced, minutes from cardiac arrest. The gurney rolled past her, heading for Trauma Bay 1. Harper followed her limp, forgotten her entire focus on the boy. Dr. Sterling was still in the lounge. "Someone paged the trauma attending," a resident called out. "He's in the building," Reagan answered. "I'll get him." Reagan ran to the physician's lounge and knocked on the glass. Sterling looked up, annoyed at the interruption. He said something to the pharmaceutical rep that made her laugh, then stood and walked to the door with the unhurried pace of a man who had never truly experienced urgency. By the time he entered Trauma Bay 1, Harper was already there, standing against the back wall. She'd positioned herself where she could see everything but remain invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over 7 years. Sterling took his time gowning up. Gloves, yellow isolation gown, face shield, each movement deliberate performance art for the residents watching him. "Talk to me," he said to the paramedics, his voice bored. 17-year-old male unrestrained driver T-boned on the passenger side, steering wheel impact to the chest, initially alert at the scene but deteriorated en route. Breath sounds absent on the right, heart rate 140, blood pressure 90/60 and dropping. Oxygen saturation 82% despite bagging. Sterling nodded like he was listening to a weather report. Chest X-ray, full trauma panel, 2 large-bore IVs, type, and cross for 6 units. He moved to the head of the bed, lifted his stethoscope, and listened to the boy's chest. His face showed nothing. Harper's hands clenched at her sides. She could see what Sterling apparently could not. The boy's jugular veins were so distended they looked ready to burst. His trachea had shifted even further to the left. His oxygen saturation was dropping 80%, 78%, 75%. She took a step forward. "Dr. Sterling?" Her voice was quiet but clear. "He needs a needle decompression, now." Sterling didn't look at her. "I'm assessing the patient, Gallagher. I'll make the treatment decisions." "Doctor, he has a tension pneumothorax. You can see the tracheal deviation. His jugular veins are—" "I said I'm assessing." Sterling's voice had an edge now. "I don't need a nurse telling me how to practice medicine." Harper looked at the monitor. Oxygen saturation 72%. Heart rate 150 and climbing. "He has maybe 60 seconds before his heart stops," Harper said louder now. Several of the residents turned to look at her. "Please, just look at his neck. Look at his chest movement." Sterling finally turned to face her. His expression was cold. "Are you seriously trying to diagnose in my trauma bay? I'm trying to save his life." "You're trying to practice medicine without a license." Sterling stepped toward her, his voice dropping to a hiss that only she could hear. "I could have you arrested. I could have security drag you out of here in handcuffs. Is that what you want?" On the monitor, the oxygen saturation hit 68%. Harper opened her mouth to respond, but the words died in her throat as the cardiac monitor alarm began to scream. The boy's heart rate spiked 160, 170, 180, then suddenly plummeted. The rhythm on the screen went chaotic, then flat. A systole. No heartbeat. "He's coding," a resident shouted. The room erupted. Nurses rushed in with the crash cart. Someone called for the code team. Sterling was barking orders, starting CPR, but Harper knew it was already too late. You couldn't compress a heart that was being crushed by air pressure in the chest cavity. Every compression would just force more air into the pleural space, making the tension worse. And then something happened that Harper hadn't planned. Something that 7 years of keeping her head down, of staying invisible, of letting her skills atrophy in silence couldn't suppress. Her body moved, not her conscious mind. Her body. Muscle memory from 312 combat missions, from 19 years of making split-second decisions where hesitation meant death. Her hand shot out and grabbed a 14-gauge needle from the crash cart. Her left hand pushed aside a resident who was in her way. Her right leg, the one that always ached, somehow didn't hurt as she lunged forward to the bedside. "Excuse me," she said, not loud, but with a tone of absolute authority that made everyone freeze. She placed her hand on the boy's chest, found the second intercostal space by feel, located the midclavicular line, and before anyone could stop her, before Sterling could even process what was happening, she drove the needle into the boy's chest. There was a moment of absolute silence, then a sound, a hiss, air rushing out under pressure, escaping from the chest cavity where it had been building, crushing the life out of this boy. The hiss lasted 3 seconds. The boy gasped. A huge shuddering breath that filled his lungs. The monitor shrieked as his heart rhythm returned. Slow at first, then stronger. Regular. The oxygen saturation number began to climb. 70, 75, 80, 85. The boy's eyes fluttered open. The blue-gray color was fading from his skin, replaced by pink. He was breathing on his own. For 5 full seconds, no one in the trauma bay moved. Then, Dr. Marcus Sterling exploded. "What the hell did you just do?" His voice was so loud that it carried into the hallway. Nurses at the station looked up. Residents in other trauma bays stuck their heads out to see what was happening. Harper removed her hand from the boy's chest. The needle was still there, a small plastic catheter left in place to keep the air from reaccumulating. She stepped back, her hands at her sides. "Needle thoracentesis," she said quietly. "He had a tension pneumothorax. I decompressed I know what a needle thoracentesis is." Sterling's face was purple with rage. "You do not make medical decisions. You are not a doctor. You are a janitor with a nursing certificate." The words echoed in the suddenly silent trauma bay. Harper stood there, her face neutral, while Sterling advanced on her. He was 6 feet tall. She was 5'6". He used his height, looming over her, invading her space. "You just committed medical malpractice," he hissed. "You performed a procedure without physician authorization. I could have you arrested for practicing medicine without a license. I could have you charged with assault." "He was dying," Harper said. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something beneath it now, something that hadn't been there before. His heart had stopped. Another 30 seconds, and the brain damage would have been. "I don't care what you think." Sterling jabbed his finger toward her chest, but didn't quite touch her. "This is my trauma bay. I am the attending. You do not override my decisions." Reagan McCoy had been standing in the corner watching the whole thing. Now she stepped forward, her young face flushed with anger. "Dr. Sterling, she just saved his life. You can see—" "Shut up, McCoy." Sterling didn't even look at her. "Shut up or you're next." Reagan's mouth snapped closed, but her eyes were blazing. Sterling turned back to Harper. The entire trauma team was watching now. Residents, nurses, respiratory therapists, even the paramedics who had brought the boy in had stopped in the doorway staring. "Get out," Sterling said. His voice was quiet now, which somehow made it worse. "Get out of my trauma bay. You are relieved of duty. Get out before I have security drag you out." Harper looked at the boy on the gurney. He was breathing. His color was good. His heart rate was steady. On the monitor, his oxygen saturation had climbed to 92%. She had saved his life. And now she was being thrown out. For just a moment, something flickered across Harper's face. Something hard. Something dangerous. Her eyes met Sterling's, and in that instant, he saw something that made him take an involuntary step back. He saw the woman she used to be. But then she blinked and it was gone. The quiet, limping night nurse returned. "Yes, doctor," Harper said. She turned and walked out of Trauma Bay 1. Her left leg was dragging again, the limp pronounced. The sound of her uneven footsteps echoed in the silent corridor. Behind her, she heard Sterling's voice, already moving on, already giving orders like nothing had happened. "Someone get a chest tube kit. I want a CT scan. And someone clean up this mess." Harper walked to the break room. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting there since midnight. It was bitter and lukewarm, but she didn't care. She sat down at the small table and stared at the wall. She had known this would happen eventually, had known that one day keeping quiet and staying invisible wouldn't be enough, that one day someone would need her to be who she really was, and she wouldn't be able to refuse. She just hadn't expected it to cost her everything. The call came 30 minutes later. Reagan knocked on the break room door, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Harper, Director Finch wants to see you in his office." Harper nodded. She stood, dumped her coffee in the sink, and followed Reagan down the hall. Director Harold Finch's office was on the second floor overlooking the ambulance bay. He was 65 years old, 3 months from retirement, and the kind of administrator who had learned that the path of least resistance was always the safest choice. When Harper walked in, Finch was sitting behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him. Dr. Sterling was standing by the window, his arms crossed, looking satisfied. "Ms. Gallagher," Finch said. His voice was tired. "Please sit down." Harper remained standing. "I'd prefer to stand if that's all right." Finch sighed and gestured to the chair anyway. Harper reluctantly sat. "Ms. Gallagher, I've received a very serious complaint from Dr. Sterling regarding your conduct in Trauma Bay 1 tonight." Finch spoke carefully, like a man walking through a minefield. "He alleges that you performed a medical procedure without his authorization. Is that correct?" "I saved a patient's life," Harper said. "You performed a needle thoracentesis," Sterling interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You made a medical diagnosis. You performed an invasive procedure. That's practicing medicine without a license, which is a felony in the state of Washington." Harper looked at him steadily. That boy's heart had stopped. The monitor showed a systole. He had maybe 90 seconds before irreversible brain damage. "If I hadn't decompressed his chest, that's not your call to make." Sterling interrupted. "I'm the attending physician. The decision to intervene was mine, not yours." "Then whose fault is it that you missed the diagnosis?" Harper's voice was still quiet, but there was an edge to it now. "You listened to his chest. You saw his vital signs. You saw the tracheal deviation, the jugular vein distension. Those are textbook signs of tension pneumothorax. A first-year medical student would have caught it." Sterling's face went red. "How dare you question my—" "Enough." Finch held up his hand, looking pained. "Ms. Gallagher, regardless of the clinical outcome, you violated hospital protocol. Dr. Sterling is the attending physician in the trauma bay. All medical decisions must go through him. You understand that, don't you?" "I understand that protocol doesn't save lives," Harper said. "Competence does." Finch winced. Sterling looked ready to explode. "Ms. Gallagher," Finch said slowly, choosing his words with care. "I've been on the phone with hospital counsel and with other parties. Dr. Sterling's father, Senator Sterling, has expressed serious concerns about this incident." Harper's expression didn't change. She'd expected this. "Senator Sterling," Finch continued, "has pointed out that Seattle Grace receives significant federal funding for our emergency services. He suggested that an institution that employs staff who don't follow proper medical protocols might not be deserving of that funding." "So this is about money," Harper said flatly. "This is about maintaining professional standards," Sterling cut in, "about ensuring that nurses stay in their lane and doctors are allowed to practice medicine without interference from unqualified personnel." Harper turned to look at him. Really look at him. "Unqualified. That's an interesting word coming from you, Marcus." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." Harper turned back to Finch. "Are we done here?" Finch looked miserable. He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Ms. Gallagher, I'm very sorry, but I have no choice. You're terminated, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. Harper didn't react, didn't argue, didn't beg. She'd spent 19 years in the Navy. She knew when a battle was lost before it began. "I'll need you to collect your personal items and surrender your hospital ID badge." Finch continued, not meeting her eyes. "We'll mail your final paycheck to your address on file." Sterling was smiling now, actually smiling, a small, satisfied smile that he couldn't quite hide. Harper stood slowly. Her left leg protested, sending a spike of pain up her spine. She ignored it. "Director Finch," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "that boy I saved tonight. His name is Daniel Marsh. He's 17 years old. He wants to be a veterinarian. He has a golden retriever named Scout. I know this because I actually talked to him while the paramedics were loading him into the ambulance, while Dr. Sterling was on his phone." She paused at the door. "When Daniel wakes up tomorrow and asks who saved his life, what are you going to tell him?" Neither man answered. Harper walked out, closing the door quietly behind her. The walk to her locker took 3 minutes. The hallway was empty at this hour, just the sound of her uneven footsteps and the distant beeping of monitors. Her locker was in the staff changing room number 47. She'd been assigned it 7 years ago on her first day. The combination lock was old stiff, 123412. She worked it open. Inside was almost nothing. She'd never personalized it the way the other nurses had. No mirror on the inside of the door. No photos taped up. No inspirational quotes. Just a spare pair of scrubs. A stethoscope that had been a gift from her graduating class at Naval Medical School, the rubber tubing cracked with age. A coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Nurse," that Reagan had given her as a joke last Christmas. And one framed photograph. Harper picked it up carefully. The frame was cheap plastic, the kind you buy at a drugstore. But the photo inside was priceless. She was 25 years old in the picture. Staff Sergeant Harper Gallagher, United States Navy, standing next to a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter somewhere in the Nevada desert. The sky behind her was that particular shade of blue you only get in the desert. Her flight suit was crisp and new. Her boots were shined. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, full of hope for the future. She'd been so young, so sure of herself, so certain that competence and hard work and doing the right thing would be enough. Life had taught her otherwise. Harper set the photo in a cardboard box she found in the recycling bin, added the stethoscope, the coffee mug, the spare scrubs. That was it. 7 years of work reduced to a box that weighed maybe 3 pounds. She removed her hospital ID badge and stared at it for a moment. The photo was 7 years old. She looked different now. Older, tired. The gray in her hair more pronounced. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. H. Gallagher RN, night shift. Harper set the badge on the shelf inside her locker and closed the door for the last time. The lock clicked shut with a finality that felt intentional. Reagan was waiting in the hallway when Harper emerged, the cardboard box in her arms. The young nurse's eyes were red and swollen. "This isn't fair," Reagan said, her voice breaking. "Harper, this isn't fair. You saved Daniel's life and they fired you." Harper set the box down on a nearby bench and pulled Reagan into a hug. The younger woman sobbed against her shoulder. "Hey," Harper said softly, rubbing Reagan's back the way she would comfort a sister. "Hey, it's okay. It's not okay. You were right, and Sterling was wrong, and they fired you." "Reagan," Harper pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. Life isn't fair. It's never been fair. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. But you saved someone's life, and I'd do it again." Harper's voice was firm. "That's what you need to understand. You don't do the right thing because you'll get rewarded for it. You do the right thing because it's right. Because when you go home at night and look at yourself in the mirror, you need to be able to live with what you see." Reagan wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Harper admitted, "but I'll figure something out. I always do." Will you be okay?" Harper smiled, and it was almost genuine. "I've survived worse than losing a job, kiddo. I'll be fine." She picked up the box again. "Take care of Daniel for me. Make sure Dr. Sterling puts that chest tube in properly. Make sure they monitor him for pneumothorax reaccumulation. Make sure he knows he's going to be okay." "I will," Reagan promised. "And Reagan, don't let them push you around. You're a good nurse. You're going to be a great nurse, but only if you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Reagan nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. Harper walked toward the exit, past the trauma bays where she'd worked countless shifts, past the nurses' station where she'd charted 1,000 patients, past the break room where she'd drunk bad coffee and listened to other people's problems. She didn't look back. There was no point. The automatic doors slid open, and the rain hit her like a physical force. It was 3:47 in the morning. The rain had intensified, coming down in sheets that turned the parking lot into a shallow lake. The streetlights created halos in the mist, orange and ghostly. Harper stood there for a moment, the cardboard box growing heavy in her arms as it began to absorb water. Her scrubs were soaked through within seconds. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face. Somewhere behind her, the hospital continued its endless rhythm. Monitors beeping, lives being saved and lives being lost. The machine that never stopped, never slowed, never cared who was feeding it. Harper's car was a 15-year-old Honda Civic parked in the back row where it always was. She limped across the wet asphalt, each step sending jolts of pain through her left leg. The cold wasn't helping. The rain wasn't helping. She reached the car and fumbled with her keys, hands numb from the cold. The cardboard box was disintegrating now, the bottom starting to give way. She yanked the door open and shoved the box onto the passenger seat before it could fall apart completely. The photograph of her younger self stared up at her from the box, water-spotted but intact. That bright-eyed 25-year-old who thought she could change the world. Harper got into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. The sudden silence was deafening. No rain, no wind, just her breathing and the tick of the engine cooling. She sat there in the darkness of her car and let the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. Fired, at 58 years old, with a bum leg and no prospects, and a rental history that showed 7 years at the same low-paying job. She should cry, should scream, should pound the steering wheel and rage at the unfairness of it all. But Harper had learned a long time ago that rage changed nothing, that tears solved nothing, that the only thing you could control was yourself and your response to the world's cruelty. So she sat and breathed and waited for the strength to start the car and drive home. From the hospital entrance, she could see Reagan standing at the glass doors watching. The young nurse lifted her hand in a small wave. Harper waved back. Then she started the engine, put the car in gear, and drove away. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. Behind her, in Trauma Bay, one Daniel Marsh was stable. His chest tube was in place. His vital signs were normal. By morning, he would be transferred to the ICU, and in a few days he would go home to his dog named Scout, and his dream of becoming a veterinarian. He would live a full life because Harper Gallagher had broken the rules, and Harper Gallagher would go home to her empty studio apartment and wonder what the hell she was supposed to do with the rest of her life. The rain followed her all the way home, relentless and cold, washing away 7 years of trying to be invisible. Harper's apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had been constructed in 1987 and hadn't been updated since. The rent was $850 a month, which was cheap for Seattle. And the reason it was cheap was that you could hear your neighbors through the walls, and the hot water only lasted for about 7 minutes. She sat in the dark. The lights were off. She hadn't bothered to turn them on when she'd come in 2 hours ago, soaked to the bone, carrying the disintegrating cardboard box. The box sat on her small kitchen table, now its contents spread out in the dim light from the street lamp outside her window. The photograph of her younger self stood propped against the wall. 25 years old. Staff Sergeant Harper Gallagher, United States Navy, standing next to a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter somewhere in the Nevada desert during advanced flight training. Her uniform was crisp, her eyes were bright, her smile was genuine. She didn't recognize that person anymore. Harper sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness and stared at that photograph. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the city, drumming against the window in rhythms that almost sounded like Morse code. Like something trying to communicate, like something trying to get in, or something trying to get out. Her left leg throbbed. She should take ibuprofen, should elevate it, should do the physical therapy exercises that the VA doctor had prescribed 7 years ago and that she'd stopped doing about 6 years and 11 months ago, because what was the point? Instead, she just sat there and let the pain wash over her in waves. The apartment was small enough that she could see everything from where she sat. The kitchenette with its 2 burners and mini fridge, the bathroom with its cracked tile and perpetually dripping faucet, the closet where she kept her clothes, and in the back, hidden behind winter coats she rarely needed in Seattle, her old Navy duffel bag. She hadn't opened that bag in 7 years, didn't need to. She knew exactly what was inside. Flight suit, boots, patches with her name and rank, and the wings that designated her as a naval flight nurse. A small American flag that had flown on her last mission, and wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture, her Navy Cross. The Navy Cross, second highest military decoration for valor in the United States. Right below the Medal of Honor, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. She'd received it for actions in Syria 2018. They'd pinned it on her chest in a ceremony at Bethesda Naval Hospital while she was still in a wheelchair, her left leg held together with external fixators and the kind of screws and plates that would set off metal detectors for the rest of her life. She'd never worn it again after that ceremony, had packed it away, had tried to pack away everything that came with it. But some things don't stay packed away. Some things live in your bones and your blood and the parts of your brain that light up when you hear certain sounds or smell certain smells. Like rotor blades, like burning fuel, like the copper tang of blood mixed with desert sand. Harper stood and limped to the kitchenette. She filled a glass with tap water and drank it standing at the sink, looking out the window at the rain-soaked parking lot below. A few cars, a dumpster that needed to be emptied, a streetlight that flickered like it was thinking about giving up entirely. This was her life now, this view, this apartment, this nothing. Her phone rang. Harper looked at it sitting on the counter, the screen lighting up with Reagan McCoy's name. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Reagan." "Harper." Reagan's voice was thick with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. What they did was wrong. It was so incredibly wrong." Harper closed her eyes. "It's over, Reagan. It's done. No point dwelling on it." "No, it's not over. Harper, listen to me. I was just checking on Daniel Marsh, that's his name, right? The boy you saved." "Well, he's awake, and you know what?" he asked. He asked who saved him, and you know what, Doctor? Sterling told him. Harper could already guess, but she let Reagan tell her. "He said it was a team effort. A team effort. Harper, you put a needle in that boy's chest and brought him back from the dead, and Sterling is standing there taking credit like he did anything except almost kill him." Something twisted in Harper's chest. Not surprise. You couldn't be surprised by something you'd expected all along. "That's how it works," Harper said quietly. "That's not how it should work. We all saw what happened. Every single nurse on that floor knows the truth. We could report him. We could go to the medical board and nothing, Reagan. He's the son of a senator. I'm a fired night shift nurse with a limp and no prospects. Who do you think they're going to believe?" There was silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that meant Reagan knew Harper was right, but didn't want to admit it. "I just wanted you to know," Reagan finally said, her voice small. "That boy is alive because of you. Whether Sterling admits it or not, whether the hospital admits it or not, you saved him. I know. And we know it too, All of us. The nurses, the residents who were in that room. We all know what you did." "Thank you, Reagan." Harper's voice was gentle. "That means more than you know. But you need to let this go. You need to keep your head down and do your job. Don't make trouble for yourself over me. I'm not worth it." "You are worth it," Reagan said fiercely. "You're worth 10 of Sterling." "Maybe, but Sterling's still employed and I'm not. That's the reality. You have to work with him. Don't make it harder on yourself by fighting battles you can't win. Harper, promise me. Promise me you'll let it go." Reagan was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I promise. But if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me, okay? Okay? I mean it. I know you do. Get some rest, Reagan. You've got another shift tomorrow. What about you? What are you going to do?" Harper looked around her dark apartment, at the water-stained ceiling, at the cardboard box with her meager possessions, at the photograph of someone she used to be. "I honestly don't know," Harper admitted, "but I'll figure something out. I always do." They said their goodbyes. Harper ended the call and set the phone back on the counter. The screen went dark. The apartment returned to its twilight gloom. She walked back to the bed and lay down, without undressing, still in her damp scrubs. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner that looked vaguely like a map of Italy. She'd spent countless sleepless nights staring at that stain, tracing the imaginary coastline, remembering places she'd been and things she'd done when she was someone else. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did anymore. Instead, she floated in that gray space between waking and sleeping, where memories lived like ghosts. Syria, 2018. The convoy had been 3 Humvees traveling along Route Bronze, a supply run that should have been routine. Harper had been in the second vehicle, sitting next to Commander Mitchell Cross, who was coordinating air support for a larger operation happening 20 clicks to the north. She remembered the heat, the kind of heat that baked the air and made mirages dance on the horizon, the kind of heat that made you wonder how anything could live in such a place. The IED had been buried in the road for probably a week, waiting, just waiting for the right target. The explosion lifted the lead Humvee 3 feet into the air and flipped it onto its side like a child's toy. The shockwave hit Harper's vehicle with enough force to spiderweb the windshield and send them skidding sideways across the road. What happened next was chaos. Gunfire from the hills, small arms, maybe an RPG she couldn't remember clearly anymore. The lead vehicle was on fire. The driver was screaming. Commander Cross was shouting coordinates into the radio, calling for air support, for medevac, for anything. And then the second explosion, bigger, closer, right under their Humvee. Harper remembered the sensation of weightlessness, of the world turning sideways, of equipment and bodies tumbling together in a space that was suddenly too small and filled with smoke, and the acrid smell of burning fuel and melting rubber. When the vehicle stopped moving, she was upside down, hanging from her seatbelt. Her left leg was pinned under something impossibly heavy. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think through the ringing in her ears. And then Cross's voice cutting through the confusion like a knife. "Harper, Harper, can you hear me?" She'd managed to croak out a yes. "We have to move. Fuel tank's compromised. This thing's going to cook off in about 90 seconds. She'd tried to move, and the pain had been unlike anything she'd ever experienced. White hot, blinding, all-consuming. Her leg was trapped under the transmission housing, which had torn loose in the rollover. She could feel the sharp edges of broken bone grinding against each other. Cross had somehow gotten his seatbelt off, had somehow managed to crawl to her in that inverted, smoke-filled space. His back was broken, she'd find that out later, 2 vertebrae fractured. But in that moment, he'd functioned like nothing was wrong. He'd pulled her free, had dragged her out through the shattered window, her leg leaving a trail of blood in the sand. Had picked her up in a fireman's carry and run, well, not run exactly, more like a shambling stagger. Because his back was broken, and she was 140 pounds of dead weight, and the insurgents in the hills were still shooting, kicking up sand around them with each near miss. She remembered looking back and seeing the Humvee engulfed in flames, remembered the heat on her face even from 50 meters away, remembered trying to tell Cross to leave her, that he couldn't carry her, that he needed to save himself. He'd told her to shut the hell up. They'd made it 400 meters before he collapsed. Just went down on his knees like a puppet with cut strings. He'd laid her down as gently as he could in his condition, then fell face first into the sand beside her. That's when Harper had looked down at her leg and seen the bone sticking out through her torn pants. The rest was fragmented. Applying a tourniquet to her own leg with hands that shook so badly she could barely work the buckle. Cross somehow getting back up, propping himself against a rock, providing covering fire with his M4 while she worked. The sound of rotor blades that meant salvation. The medevac helicopter descending through hostile airspace with its door gunner laying down suppressing fire. Strong hands lifting her onto a stretcher, Cross being loaded onto another stretcher, both of them holding hands during the flight back to the field hospital because they both knew they might not make it, and if they were going to die, they weren't going to die alone. Cross squeezing her hand and making stupid jokes about how she'd probably get a promotion out of this, while Harper focused on not screaming every time the helicopter hit turbulence and her shattered leg shifted. The surgeon at the field hospital telling her they might have to amputate. Harper telling him that if he took her leg, she'd haunt him for the rest of his life. The surgeon laughing and saying he'd see what he could do. Waking up 3 days later at Bethesda Naval Hospital with her leg still attached, but looking like something from a medical textbook. Titanium plates, surgical screws, enough hardware to build a small bicycle, and Cross in the bed next to hers, his back braced, unable to move but alive. Both of them alive. Harper blinked and the memory dissolved. She was back in her apartment, back in the dark, back in the now. She touched her left leg through her scrubs, feeling the ridge of scar tissue that ran from her knee to her ankle. The doctors had done remarkable work, had saved the leg when amputation seemed inevitable. She'd done a year of physical therapy, had learned to walk again, then to walk without a cane, then to walk without a noticeable limp when she concentrated. But she'd never flown again, never stood on the deck of a helicopter and felt the wind, and known with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That person was gone. That life was over. She'd accepted that 7 years ago when she'd packed away her uniform and taken a night shift job at a civilian hospital where nobody knew who she was or what she'd done, except Marcus Sterling had known, had recognized her name, had made sure she paid for ruining his military career by ruining her civilian one. Harper closed her eyes and tried to find sleep. She was still trying when the sound began. At first it was so faint that she thought she was imagining it, a low thrumming, more felt than heard, a vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Harper's eyes opened. The thrumming grew louder, deeper. It resonated in her chest, in her bones, in the spaces between her heartbeats. It was a sound she knew better than her own voice, a sound that was burned into her DNA after 19 years of service. She sat up. The pictures on her wall were shaking slightly. The water in the glass on her nightstand rippled in concentric circles like something from Jurassic Park. And then she knew. Before her conscious mind could process it, before logic could intervene, her body knew. Rotor blades, heavy rotors, multiple aircraft. Harper stood and crossed to the window. Her hands found the sill and gripped it tight as she looked out into the rain-streaked darkness. The thrumming had become rhythmic beating. Thump, 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 like the heartbeat of something massive and ancient and alive, and then the sound crescendoed into a deafening roar that shook the building. 3 Black Hawk helicopters descended from the low cloud cover like dark angels of war. No lights except the required anti-collision strobes that flashed red against the belly of the clouds, matte black paint against the night sky, moving in tight formation with the kind of precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training. They descended toward the apartment complex parking lot. Harper's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't possible. this didn't happen. Military helicopters didn't just appear over civilian areas in the middle of the night. There were regulations, airspace restrictions, noise ordinances. This was the middle of Seattle, for God's sake. And yet, the lead helicopter flared nose up, bleeding off speed with a maneuver that spoke of an expert pilot. The downdraft from its rotors sent rain spraying outward in sheets. A car alarm went off, then another, then three more. Lights were coming on in windows throughout the complex, people woken by the impossible sound of war machines descending into suburbia. The Black Hawk's wheels touched wet asphalt with barely a bump. Before the aircraft had even fully settled, both side doors slid open. Marines poured out. Harper counted them automatically, a skill beaten into her over 19 years. 12. Full combat loadout. Plate carriers heavy with ceramic plates. M4 carbines held at low ready. Fast helmets with night vision mounts flipped up. They moved with the fluid precision of a unit that had trained together for years, fanning out to establish a perimeter with the kind of efficiency that would make a drill instructor weep with pride. They weren't here for a training exercise. Training exercises didn't happen in civilian parking lots at 4 a.m. The second and third helicopters landed in formation, blocking off the parking lot exits. More Marines deployed, establishing overlapping fields of fire. Someone was taking this very seriously. Harper's phone rang. She grabbed it without looking, her eyes still locked on the scene below. "Hello? Harper, it's Reagan. Oh my God, Harper, you need to turn on the news right now. Something's happening at the hospital. There are military helicopters and armed soldiers, and they're asking for someone, and Harper, they're asking for Angel 6. And I don't understand what's happening, but..." Harper's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Angel 6. Nobody had called her that in 7 years. That call sign had been buried with her Navy career, filed away in classified personnel records that should have been sealed. Forgotten. Except nothing was ever truly forgotten. "Reagan," Harper said, her voice suddenly calm and very clear in a way that would have surprised her if she'd had time to think about it. "I need you to do something for me." "What, Harper? What's going on? Why are they asking for..." "Stay out of the way. Whatever's happening at the hospital, just stay out of the way and keep your head down. Do you understand?" "But Harper..." Harper ended the call. She turned from the window just as someone knocked on her door. Not a gentle knock, not a neighbor complaining about the noise. A sharp, authoritative rap, rap, rap that could only mean one thing: military. Harper crossed the small apartment in 4 limping steps and pulled open the door. 2 Marines stood in the hallway. Both were in their mid-20s. Both carried their rifles in a low, ready position that suggested they knew how to use them. The one on the left had sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. The one on the right had a radio pack and the slightly glazed look of someone monitoring multiple frequencies. They looked at Harper, assessed her in the span of a heartbeat. Wet scrubs, graying hair, obvious limp, 58 years old, and looking every day of it. And then simultaneously they came to attention and saluted. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice crisp and professional. "Lieutenant Commander Harper Gallagher." Harper hadn't been saluted in 7 years, hadn't been called by her rank in 7 years, hadn't been treated like anything other than furniture in 7 years. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. "Yes," she finally managed, "that's me." "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Rivera, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. We need you to come with us immediately. Commander Cross has requested your presence for an emergency medical situation." Mitchell Cross. The man she'd pulled from a burning Humvee 7 years ago. The man who'd carried her 400 meters on a broken back while taking fire. What happened? Harper asked, her mind already shifting gears, already thinking tactically. "Is Mitchell injured?" "Yes, ma'am, but I don't have details on his condition. What I can tell you is that a force recon training operation in the Oregon Cascades went sideways approximately 4 hours ago. 7 Marines are currently trapped in a box canyon with multiple casualties. The medevac helicopter was shot down attempting extraction." Harper felt her stomach drop. Shot down in Oregon. What kind of training op involves? Ma'am, I don't have operational details. What I know is we have Marines on the ground taking fire. We have casualties that need immediate medical attention, and Commander Cross specifically requested you by name. Mitchell's not a field medic. He's an instructor now. Why is he? Commander Cross was supervising the training op when it went hot. He's one of the casualties. Sergeant Rivera's expression didn't change, but Harper could hear the urgency beneath his professional calm. Ma'am, we need to move, now. What are the casualties? Corporal Ethan Bradford has sustained significant trauma, tension, pneumothorax, and suspected internal bleeding. He's refusing medical treatment. Harper blinked. Refusing? Why would a Marine with a collapsed lung refuse treatment? Ma'am, his exact words were, I want Angel 6. Nobody touches me until Angel 6 gets here. Those were his direct orders, and he won't let anyone override them, not even Commander Cross. Harper stared at the sergeant, trying to process this information. A 20-year-old corporal with a potentially fatal injury is giving orders. Ma'am, when you're the son of General Von Bradford and you're bleeding out in a canyon, you can give any orders you want. And what Corporal Bradford wants is you. The rain hammered against the hallway window. Someone's car alarm was still going off in the parking lot, a futile protest against the military occupation of their peaceful apartment complex. Harper could hear voices outside, people shouting, demanding to know what was happening. 7 years. She'd spent 7 years being invisible, being small, being the janitor nurse that nobody noticed or cared about. She'd built a quiet life in the shadows where the past couldn't find her. And in one night, both worlds had come crashing back. Give me 2 minutes, Harper said. The Marines stepped back. We'll be right here, ma'am. Harper closed the door and moved with a speed and purpose she hadn't felt in years. The closet. Winter coats pushed aside. The Navy duffel bag pulled into the light for the first time in 7 years. The zipper stuck. She forced it, yanking hard enough that she heard stitches pop. The bag opened, and the smell hit her immediately. Canvas and gun oil, and the particular scent of military-grade fabric that never quite lost its chemical treatment smell, no matter how long you stored it. She pulled out the flight suit, olive drab green with her name tape still sewn above the right pocket. Gallagher. Above that, the silver wings of a naval flight nurse. On the left shoulder, the unit patch of her last deployment. Harper stripped off her damp civilian scrubs and pulled on the flight suit. It was looser than she remembered. She'd lost weight over the years, muscle mass converting to the softer flesh of middle age. But it still fit. Still felt right in a way that civilian clothes never had. The boots were next. Tactical boots with reinforced toes and ankle support broken in from years of wear. She laced them tight, working the laces through the hooks with muscle memory that came back like breathing, each motion automatic and sure. From the bottom of the bag she pulled out a leather jacket. Not military issue. Personal purchase from a shop in San Diego years ago. Brown leather, worn soft from use with gold thread embroidery on the back that spelled out her call sign, Angel 6. Harper put on the jacket and looked at herself in the small mirror on the back of the bathroom door. The woman looking back at her was not the same woman who'd sat in the dark 2 hours ago, wondering what to do with her life. This woman stood straight despite the bad leg. This woman's eyes were clear and focused. This woman looked like she could save lives and take names and not apologize for either. Harper grabbed her phone and wallet, took one last look at the photograph on the table, that 25-year-old kid standing next to the helicopter with her whole life ahead of her. Let's go find out if you're still in here somewhere, Harper said to her reflection. She opened the door. The Marines were exactly where they'd been standing at parade rest in the hallway like statues. Ready, ma'am? Sergeant Rivera asked. Ready. They moved as a unit down the hallway, boots echoing on the worn carpet, down the stairs because the elevator was too slow, out into the rain that immediately soaked Harper's hair but couldn't touch the flight suit's water-resistant fabric. Neighbors were everywhere now, hanging out of windows, standing in doorways, phones out recording everything. Someone was shouting about calling the police. Someone else was shouting something about the Second Amendment and government overreach. An old man in a bathrobe was demanding to speak to whoever was in charge. Harper ignored all of it, focused on the helicopter, on the mission, on the fact that somewhere in the Oregon mountains, Mitchell Cross was bleeding and a scared kid was refusing treatment because of stories his father had told him about a nurse named Angel 6. The lead Black Hawk was still running rotors at flight idle, the turbines making that distinctive high-pitched whine that Harper had heard in her dreams for 7 years. The crew chief stood at the open door, hand extended, to help her up. Harper took the hand and pulled herself into the aircraft. Her left leg screamed in protest, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. It didn't have to stop you. The interior was exactly as she remembered. The webbed seats along both sides, the smell of hydraulic fluid, and JP-8 jet fuel. The red-lit cabin that preserved night vision. The vibration of a powerful machine barely restrained, ready to leap back into the sky. A man sat in the far seat headset on, watching her with eyes that assessed and calculated. Captain Slade Thorne. She could read the rank insignia and unit patch even in the red light. Force Recon. Elite of the elite. The scar through his eyebrow was visible, a white line that spoke of violence survived. He stood and saluted. Harper returned the salute and took a seat, buckling the 4-point harness with practiced efficiency. The crew chief handed her a headset. She pulled it on, and the world transformed. The roar of the engines became background noise, filtered through active noise cancellation. The intercom clicked to life with a clarity that was almost startling. "Commander Gallagher," Thorne's voice came through crisp and clear. "Thank you for coming, ma'am." "Captain, situation report." Thorne didn't waste time with pleasantries. Harper appreciated that. At 0300 this morning, a 7-man Force Recon team conducting high-altitude survival training in the Oregon Cascades encountered hostile forces. Unknown number of combatants, military-grade weapons, possible connection to illegal operations in the national forest. The team took casualties and went to ground in a location they're calling Devil's Throat. It's a box canyon with vertical walls, no vehicle access, severely limited landing zone options. "You said the medevac was shot down." "Affirmative. MV-22 Osprey attempted extraction at 0430. Took an RPG to the tail section and went down hard in the canyon. Both pilots survived with injuries, but the flight medic was KYA." Harper felt that like a physical blow to the chest. Another flight medic gone. Another person who'd chosen to run toward danger instead of away from it, and paid the ultimate price. "Current casualty status?" she asked, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. 3 critical, 4 ambulatory. The 3 critical are Corporal Ethan Bradford, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Hayes, and Commander Mitchell Cross. Harper's breath stopped in her throat. "How bad is Mitchell?" "Shrapnel wounds to the abdomen. He's conscious but deteriorating, refusing evacuation until Bradford is stable." Of course he was. That was Mitchell. Never leave your people behind. Never abandon someone who needed you. It was what made him a great commander and what was probably going to get him killed one of these days. "And Bradford won't accept treatment from anyone but me," Harper said. "Negative, ma'am. He's been told about you. His father, General Bradford, served with Commander Cross in Iraq and Afghanistan. The general apparently told his son stories about Angel 6, about Syria, about what you did to save Commander Cross. When Bradford took the hit and started going critical, he made it very clear. Angel 6 or nobody. He's 20 years old with a collapsed lung, making life or death medical decisions. Ma'am, when your father is a 3-star general and you're bleeding out in a canyon and nobody knows if help is coming, you can make any decision you want. And what Corporal Bradford wants is the legend his father told him about." The Black Hawk's engines changed pitch. They were preparing for takeoff. Harper could feel the helicopter straining against its own weight, ready to leap into the sky. Harper looked out the open door one last time at her apartment building. Lights on in every window now, people watching, recording. This would be all over social media in minutes. The mystery helicopters that descended on a Seattle apartment complex before dawn. The military operation in civilian territory. Let them watch. Let them wonder. Harper had more important things to worry about. Flight time to the canyon, she asked. 32 minutes at current weather conditions. Storm's getting worse. We have maybe a 40-minute window before visibility drops to zero, and we have to scrub the whole operation. If we don't get those Marines out in the next hour, they're spending another night in that canyon taking fire. Equipment. Full Level 2 trauma kit on board. We've got what you need for field stabilization, but if Bradford needs surgery, we'll have to get him out and to a surgical suite. Closest trauma center capable of handling this is back in Seattle. The crew chief gave a thumbs up to the pilot. The turbine spooled up to full power. The vibration increased until Harper could feel it in her teeth. One more thing, Thorne said, his voice carrying an edge of satisfaction. When we touched down at Seattle Grace Hospital 20 minutes ago looking for you, the hospital administration was less than cooperative. Harper allowed herself a small, cold smile. I imagine Director Finch was very surprised to see you. Surprised isn't quite the word I'd use. Terrified might be more accurate. There was a Dr. Sterling there who seemed particularly upset. Threatened to call his father the senator. Threatened to have us arrested for illegal military operations on civilian property. Made quite a scene in front of his staff. The Black Hawk lifted off. The parking lot dropped away beneath them, the apartment building shrinking to the size of a dollhouse. The city lights spread out below like a glowing map of human civilization, vast and bright and completely unaware that 3 war machines were flying over it. How did you handle Dr. Sterling? Harper asked. I told him that if he didn't get out of my way in the next 5 seconds, I'd have him arrested for interfering with a federal emergency operation under Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Thorne's voice carried grim amusement. Then I told him I'd looked up his record. Told him I knew he'd washed out of the Navy medical program for incompetence and arrogance. Told him that the janitor nurse he'd fired this morning was actually a Navy Cross recipient who'd saved more lives in combat than he'd probably treated in his entire career. Harper said nothing, just watched the city recede beneath them. He had this look on his face, Thorne continued, like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real, and also his dog died. Asked me if I was talking about the cleaning lady. Called you a cleaning lady to my face while standing in a hospital you'd worked at for 7 years. What did you say? I told him that cleaning ladies clean up messes, and that you'd be cleaning up his mess for the rest of his career because I was personally filing a complaint with the Navy Medical Board about his conduct. Then I informed the hospital director that Seattle Grace would be receiving a formal investigation into their hiring practices and that Dr. Sterling's medical decisions would be under review. The helicopter banked hard to the east, leaving Seattle behind. The rain was a solid curtain now, the city lights blurring into smears of orange and white. They climbed rapidly, punching through the low clouds into clearer air above. The hospital tried to stop us from taking off from their pad, Thorne said. Threatened legal action. Said we needed FAA clearance and permits and probably a notarized letter from God himself. Let me guess. You took off anyway? Affirmative, ma'am. I made it very clear that when United States Marines are in the field calling for Angel 6, Angel 6 goes. Hospital administrators don't get a vote. FAA regulations don't get a vote. The only vote that matters is the one cast by Marines who are bleeding and need help. Harper closed her eyes for a moment, letting the vibration of the helicopter wash over her. 7 years of keeping quiet. 7 years of being invisible. 7 years of accepting humiliation and disrespect because she'd thought that part of her life was over. And in one night, one phone call, one desperate plea from a dying Marine, that entire carefully constructed fiction had been demolished. There was no going back now, even if she wanted to. Tell me about Bradford's injuries, Harper said, her voice shifting into the cool, analytical tone of a flight nurse assessing a mission. His tension pneumothorax, what are his current vitals? Thorne pulled out a ruggedized tablet and brought up real-time medical data being transmitted from the canyon via encrypted satellite link. Heart rate 138, blood pressure 88/54, oxygen saturation 82% and dropping, respiratory rate 34 and climbing, tracheal deviation confirmed on visual exam, jugular vein distension present and worsening. Harper processed the information automatically, her brain running through differential diagnoses and treatment protocols like a computer executing code. The clinical picture was clear and getting worse. Classic tension pneumothorax advancing rapidly toward cardiovascular collapse. The collapsed lung was creating pressure in the chest cavity, compressing the heart and major blood vessels. Every breath Bradford took made it worse. Every minute that passed brought him closer to cardiac arrest. Has anyone attempted needle decompression? Negative, ma'am. Bradford won't allow it. Says if anyone but Angel 6 puts a needle in him, he'll shoot them. And before you ask, yes, he's serious. The kid's got his sidearm, and he's made it very clear he'll use it if he has to. He's in pain, terrified, and making irrational decisions based on stories his father told him. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think it's irrational. His father is a 3-star general with 30 years of combat experience. If General Bradford says Angel 6 is the person you want in your corner when everything's gone to hell, I'm inclined to believe him. They flew in silence for several minutes. The city gave way to suburbs, which gave way to smaller towns, which gave way to dark stretches of forest. The Cascade Mountains loomed ahead, dark shapes against a darker sky, their peaks lost in clouds. Harper's mind was already working through the procedure. Needle decompression was straightforward in theory, 14-gauge catheter, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line on the affected side. Insert the needle, penetrate the pleural space, release the trapped air. Immediate pressure relief. Patient can breathe again. Stabilize and prepare for chest tube placement and transport. She'd done it hundreds of times in training, done it dozens of times in combat, had once done it on herself, after a particularly bad helicopter landing in Afghanistan because the medic with her had been unconscious and someone needed to do it. But this wasn't about the procedure. This was about a scared kid who'd put his faith in a legend he'd only heard about in stories from his father. A legend about a nurse who'd crawled into burning vehicles and performed surgery under fire and refused to let people die. This was about not letting that kid down. Commander Cross, Harper said quietly, how is he really? Thorne was silent for a moment, and in that silence, Harper heard everything he wasn't saying. He's tough, ma'am. You know that better than anyone. But he took multiple shrapnel fragments to the lower abdomen. Possible liver involvement, possible bowel perforation. He's bleeding internally, and there's nothing we can do about it in the field conditions. He needs a surgical suite, and he needs it soon. But he won't leave until Bradford is stable. Correct. And Bradford won't let anyone treat him until I arrive. Correct. Harper looked out at the darkness rushing past below them at the forests and mountains, where 7 Marines were huddled in a canyon, bleeding scared, waiting for salvation in the form of a 58-year-old woman with a bum leg who'd been fired from her job 6 hours ago. How did you find me? Harper asked. My military records were sealed after my medical retirement. Commander Cross never sealed his records. He kept everything, every citation, every commendation, every after-action report. Your name is all over his service record. When this went sideways and Bradford started demanding Angel 6 Cross knew exactly where to find you, had your current address in his personal files. He's been keeping track of me for 7 years. Ma'am, with all due respect, when someone saves your life by crawling into a burning vehicle with a broken leg, you don't stop keeping track of them, ever. The helicopter began to descend. Through the rain-streaked windscreen, Harper could see the dark bulk of the mountains rising up to meet them, ancient and indifferent to human suffering. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Weather is deteriorating fast. Visibility is maybe 100 meters and dropping. Wind gusts up to 40 knots. This is going to be a very tight insertion, people. Thorne looked at Harper, his eyes serious. "Ma'am, are you ready for this? I need to know right now. If you're not ready, if you have any doubts at all, tell me now, and we'll find another way." Harper thought about Daniel Marsh, the 17-year-old kid she'd saved just hours ago by breaking the rules. Thought about being fired for doing the right thing. Thought about 7 years of being invisible, of being told she was just a janitor, of accepting disrespect because she'd thought that part of her life was over. Thought about Mitchell Cross carrying her 400 meters on a broken back while taking fire because he refused to leave her behind. Thought about a scared 20-year-old Marine named Ethan Bradford who was betting his life on a legend he'd never met. "I've been ready for 7 years," Harper said, her voice steady and sure. "I just didn't know it until tonight." The Black Hawk dropped into the canyon like a stone falling into darkness, and the night swallowed them whole. The canyon appeared out of the rain and darkness like the throat of some ancient beast. Devil's Throat was aptly named. Vertical basalt walls rose 300 feet on either side, so close together that the Black Hawk's rotor wash created a vortex effect, bouncing turbulent air back and forth between the rock faces in a way that made the helicopter buck and shudder like a living thing trying to throw off a rider. "I can't set down," the pilot shouted over the intercom, fighting the controls with both hands. "The LZ is too hot, and the canyon walls are creating severe turbulence. You'll have to fast rope." Harper looked down through the open door. 60 feet below, barely visible through the rain and darkness, she could see the wreckage of the Osprey. It was a twisted skeleton of metal embedded in the rocky canyon floor, one wing torn completely off the fuselage, crumpled like a beer can. Muzzle flashes sparked from the tree line to the north, incoming fire. Someone down there was still shooting at anything that moved. "Suppressing fire," Thorne ordered. The door gunner on the opposite side opened up with the M240 machine gun. The sound was absolutely deafening, even through Harper's headset, a mechanical roar that she felt in her chest cavity. Tracers arced into the darkness, red streaks of light searching for targets they might never find. Harper unbuckled her harness and moved to the door. The crew chief was already rigging the fast rope, a thick, braided line that would drop straight down to the ground 60 feet below. "Ma'am, we need to move fast," the crew chief shouted, his young face tense with concentration. "The longer we hover here, the bigger target we make. These walls are funneling our sound. Everyone within 5 miles knows we're here." Harper looked at the rope, looked at the darkness below where armed men were shooting at them. Looked at her left leg, which was already starting to throb from just the stress of sitting in the helicopter. Fast roping required gripping the rope with your gloved hands and controlling your descent speed with your legs, using them like brakes. It required strength and coordination, and 2 fully functional legs that could work together to create friction. Harper had one fully functional leg and one that was held together with titanium plates and surgical screws and scar tissue that would never be as strong as the original bone. "Ma'am," the crew chief was waiting, rope in hand. Harper grabbed the rope with both hands. "Send me," she said. The descent was controlled, falling with a thin veneer of technique. Harper wrapped her gloved hands around the thick, braided rope and stepped into empty space. Gravity took over immediately, pulling her down with inexorable force. She tried to brake with her legs, tried to create friction by squeezing the rope between her boots and inner thighs, the way she'd been trained, but her left leg wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't provide the pressure and control she needed. She was falling too fast. The ground rushed up to meet her. 40 feet, 30, 20, 10. She hit hard, all her weight coming down on her right leg because her left one had buckled on impact. Harper went down hard, rolling across rocky ground that was slick with rain and probably blood. The trauma bag she'd clipped to her tactical vest slammed into her ribs with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Bullets pinged off rocks inches from her head, sharp cracks that her brain registered as close and getting closer. "Move, move, move!" someone was screaming. Hands grabbed her tactical vest and dragged her bodily behind a large boulder. Harper found herself pressed against wet stone, gasping for breath, her left leg on fire with pain that threatened to white out her vision. "You made it!" The voice belonged to a young man barely visible in the darkness and rain. "Holy shit, you actually made it. I'm Corporal Ethan Bradford, and you're Angel 6, and my dad told me about you, and—" Corporal Harper cut him off, her voice sharp with authority and pain. "Are you the one with the tension pneumothorax?" "Yes, ma'am, but I'm okay. I can wait. Commander Cross is worse. He needs—" Harper grabbed the front of Bradford's tactical vest with both hands and pulled him close enough to see his face in the dim light reflecting off the wet rocks. He was 20 years old, maybe 21. Blonde hair matted with sweat and rain. Face pale even in the darkness, lips with a faint blue tinge that meant hypoxia. His breathing was rapid and shallow, each breath a visible effort. "You're not okay," Harper said flatly. "Your lips are cyanotic, you're tachypneic. And if I put my hand on your chest right now, I'll feel your trachea deviating to the left side. So don't tell me you're okay when you're maybe 10 minutes from cardiac arrest." Another burst of gunfire from the tree line closer this time. The Marines around the Osprey wreckage returned fire with controlled 3-round bursts, professional and precise. "Where's Commander Cross?" Harper demanded. Bradford pointed toward the Osprey with a shaking hand. "Inside the fuselage, ma'am. We've got 3 critical in there. But ma'am, you gotta understand, I told them nobody touches me until you got here. And I meant it. And I know what you told them, Corporal. Now where's my trauma bag?" "Your what?" "My medical kit. The trauma bag I was carrying. I dropped it when I landed." "I got it, ma'am." A Marine appeared from the darkness holding Harper's bag. His uniform name tape read, "Diaz. Sergeant Diaz, ma'am. Welcome to hell. It's not much, but it's home." Harper took the bag, running her hands over it quickly to assess damage. The hard case had protected the contents. "Casualties. 3 critical, like the corporal said. Commander Cross has multiple shrapnel fragments to the abdomen, probable internal bleeding. Staff Sergeant Hayes took a round through the femoral artery. We've got a tourniquet on it, but she's lost a dangerous amount of blood. And this stubborn kid right here won't let anyone touch his chest until you showed up." "Not until Angel 6 got here," Bradford said, and despite the obvious pain he was in, there was fierce pride in his voice. "My dad said if I'm ever in real trouble, real life or death trouble, Angel 6 is who I want. Said you saved Commander Cross in Syria when everyone else thought he was dead. Said you're the best combat medic who ever lived." Harper looked at this kid, this scared 20-year-old who'd refused treatment that could save his life because of stories his father had told him. Stories about a person Harper used to be back when she believed competence and courage were enough. "Your dad was right about one thing," Harper said quietly. "I don't give up. Now lie down and let me save your life like I saved his commanding officer." She half limped, half crawled toward the Osprey wreckage, dragging her trauma bag. The interior was lit by chemical light sticks, casting everything in an eerie green glow that made the blood look black and the injured look like corpses. Commander Mitchell Cross was propped against the buckled bulkhead, one hand pressed against his abdomen. Even in the green light, Harper could see that his face was gray, the color of old concrete. His uniform was soaked with blood, so much blood that it was impossible to tell where the wounds ended and the fabric began. When he saw Harper, something crossed his face, relief and guilt and joy and pain all mixed together in an expression that said more than words ever could. "Harp," he said, his voice weak but still recognizable. "You came. I knew you'd come, but I was starting to worry that—" "Mitchell." Harper knelt beside him with a grunt of pain as her leg protested. "Shut up and let me work." She did a quick primary assessment, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Multiple entry wounds in the lower left quadrant of his abdomen. No exit wounds visible, which meant the shrapnel was still inside him, possibly doing more damage with every movement. His abdomen was rigid and distended, internal bleeding almost certainly. Liver or spleen or maybe both. He needed surgery, and he needed it hours ago, but Bradford was closer to death. Minutes, not hours. "Mitchell, I need to stabilize Bradford first," Harper said, already knowing what his answer would be. "Can you hold on for 10 minutes?" Cross managed a weak smile that looked more like a grimace. "I carried you 400 meters through enemy fire on a broken back. I think I can wait 10 minutes. But Harp, don't take any longer than you have to. I'd really like to see my daughter graduate high school next year." Harper squeezed his shoulder gently, then moved back to Bradford. The young corporal had followed her order and was lying flat on a thermal blanket that someone had spread over the rocky ground. "Okay, Corporal," Harper said, pulling on nitrile gloves with practiced snaps. "I'm going to examine you, and it's going to hurt. Don't punch me." "No promises, ma'am." Harper put her hands on Bradford's chest, palpating through his tactical vest. Even through the thick Kevlar and ceramic plates, she could feel the asymmetry in his chest movement. The right side was barely moving at all, held rigid by pain and the pressure building inside. She could feel his trachea, that firm tube of cartilage in the center of his neck, shifted noticeably to the left. The jugular veins in his neck were distended, bulging under his rain-slick skin like ropes about to snap. Textbook tension, pneumothorax. So textbook, it could have been a photograph in a medical manual, and getting worse by the second. "Diaz, I need vitals," Harper said sharply. "Blood pressure cuff and pulse oximeter right now." Sergeant Diaz appeared with the equipment like a well-trained surgical assistant. Harper worked quickly but carefully. Blood pressure 88/52 and dropping. Heart rate 144 climbing. Oxygen saturation 78% falling. She looked at her watch and made a decision that would either save this kid's life or end her medical career permanently if she still had one to end. "Bradford, listen to me very carefully," Harper said, her voice calm and clear despite the chaos around them. "You have a collapsed right lung. Air is building up in your chest cavity, and it's crushing your heart. In approximately 3 minutes, your heart is going to stop beating. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Bradford's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded. "I'm going to stick a needle into your chest. It's going to hurt like hell. But when I do it, you're going to be able to breathe again. The pressure will release, and your heart will be able to beat properly." "Okay. Okay, ma'am." Harper pulled out her phone. It had survived the fast rope descent in her zippered pocket and opened the timer app. She set it for 3 minutes and placed it where Bradford could see the glowing numbers. "That's how long we have," Harper said, meeting his eyes. "Watch that clock, Corporal. When it hits 0, you're either breathing on your own or you're not breathing at all. No pressure." Bradford let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You got one hell of a bedside manner, ma'am." "I'm a flight nurse, not a therapist, Bradford. We don't have time for gentle reassurance. Diaz, I need you to hold a flashlight right here on his chest." Harper pulled out a 14-gauge needle catheter from her trauma bag. The familiar weight of it in her hand brought back a rush of memories, dozens of procedures under fire, hundreds in training, one memorable occasion on herself when there was no one else to do it. Her hands were completely steady. 7 years of mopping floors and emptying bedpans fell away like dead skin. This was what she was. This was what she'd always been. She palpated Bradford's chest again, finding landmarks by touch. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the exact spot where she needed to penetrate between the ribs to access the pleural space. The timer started counting down. 2:59, 2:58, 2:57. "Here we go, Corporal," Harper said. "Stay still." She drove the needle into Bradford's chest with smooth, controlled force. The resistance was immediate and familiar. Skin, subcutaneous tissue, muscle, the tough intercostal muscles between the ribs. Then a distinct pop as the needle penetrated through the parietal pleura into the pleural space. And then the sound that meant success. A hiss, air rushing out under tremendous pressure, escaping from the chest cavity where it had been trapped, where it had been building with every agonizing breath, crushing the life out of this young Marine, one breath at a time. The hiss lasted 5 full seconds. Bradford gasped. a huge, shuddering, desperate breath that filled his lungs with air for the first time in hours. His back arched off the ground with the force of it. The oxygen saturation number on the monitor began to climb. 78, 82, 85, 88. Holy shit, Bradford breathed, his voice raspy but stronger. Holy shit, I can breathe. I can actually breathe. 2:31 remaining on the timer, but Harper wasn't done. A needle decompression was a temporary solution, a finger in the dike. She needed to place a chest tube to keep the lung expanded, and she needed to assess for other injuries. That much trauma to the chest meant broken ribs at minimum, and broken ribs could cause all sorts of secondary problems. "Bradford, I need to do an ultrasound of your abdomen," Harper said. "Diaz portable ultrasound unit from my bag, please." While Diaz dug through the trauma bag with practiced efficiency, Harper did a more thorough physical exam. She lifted Bradford's shirt and tactical vest, revealing a chest that was a mass of bruises, purple and black contusions spreading across his rib cage like abstract art. Definitely broken ribs. The question was, what else was broken? The ultrasound machine powered up with a quiet beep. Harper squirted gel onto the probe and placed it on Bradford's abdomen, running through the fast exam protocol, focused assessment with sonography for trauma. She was looking for free fluid, which would indicate internal bleeding. There, in the upper right quadrant, in the hepatorenal recess, what trauma surgeons sometimes called Morrison's pouch, named after the anatomist who first described it. A dark stripe of fluid that definitely shouldn't be there. Blood. "You've got internal bleeding," Harper said, keeping her voice calm and factual. "Probably a liver laceration from one of those broken ribs. Bradford, I need to do something that's going to sound completely insane, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Bradford looked at her with eyes that had seen the needle decompression work exactly as she'd promised. "You just stuck a needle in my chest and I'm still alive. I trust you with my life, ma'am." Harper pulled out a device that looked deceptively simple, a long, thin catheter with a small balloon attached near the tip. This is called REBOA, resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. It's bleeding-edge technology, no pun intended. "I'm going to thread this catheter up through your femoral artery, that's the big artery in your groin, all the way up into your aorta. Then I'm going to inflate this balloon, which will effectively cut off all blood flow below your diaphragm." Bradford stared at her. "You're going to put a balloon in my main artery. Think of it like putting a cork in a leaking pipe. It stops the bleeding below the balloon, which means all your available blood gets directed to your brain and heart and lungs. The organs that absolutely must have blood flow. Your liver can wait, your legs can wait, your brain cannot wait." "That sounds completely insane, ma'am." "It is completely insane. It's also your only chance of surviving long enough to get to a surgical suite. Without it, you'll bleed out internally before we can get you off this mountain. With it, you might have 30 to 40 minutes before we start seeing tissue damage to your lower extremities. More than enough time to get you to Seattle. 200 remaining on the timer." Bradford looked at the countdown, looked at Harper, made the same choice his father had probably made a dozen times in combat trust. The medic, because the medic is the only thing standing between you and death. "Do it," he said. Harper worked with the speed and precision of someone who'd performed this procedure in conditions far worse than a crashed helicopter in a rainy canyon. She located the femoral artery by palpation. She could feel the pulse even through the chaos, and prepped the insertion site with betadine in a quick swipe that would horrify an operating room nurse, but was the best she could do in field conditions. She inserted the introducer sheath with practiced efficiency. First attempt, good flow, perfect placement. Threading the REBOA catheter up through the femoral artery required a delicate touch that seemed at odds with the violent chaos of their situation. Too much force, and she could perforate the vessel wall, causing catastrophic internal bleeding. Too little force, and the catheter wouldn't advance. She had to feel her way up through Bradford's vascular system, navigating by sensation and experience. She threaded the catheter up through the iliac artery into the abdominal aorta, feeling for the resistance that would tell her she'd reached the proper position. The portable ultrasound helped. She could see the catheter tip advancing on the screen, a bright white line moving through the darkness of Bradford's body. 1:30 on the timer. "Diaz, I need you to call out blood pressure numbers," Harper said, not looking up from her work. "Every 15 seconds, don't stop. Blood pressure 86/50, ma'am." The catheter was in position. Harper checked placement with the ultrasound one more time. Perfect. The balloon was sitting in zone 1 of the aorta, right where it needed to be, just below the diaphragm. "Here we go," Harper said. "Bradford, you're going to feel some weird pressure. That's normal." She inflated the balloon slowly, watching the ultrasound screen. The balloon expanded, pressing against the walls of the aorta, creating a complete obstruction to blood flow. "Blood pressure 92/54, Diaz called out. "Rising, 100/60, 108/62, 120/70. The bleeding below the diaphragm had stopped. All of Bradford's remaining blood was being diverted to his vital organs: brain, heart, lungs. His liver would have to wait. His kidneys would have to wait. But he'd survive. For now. 0:58 on the timer. Harper sat back on her heels, ignoring the screaming pain in her left leg. Her hands were covered in blood, some Bradford's, some from the other casualties she'd briefly examined. Her flight suit was soaked with rain and possibly blood and definitely mud. She looked like she'd been through a war, which, in a way, she had. 0:47 on the timer. "How do you feel?" Harper asked Bradford. "Like someone stuck a needle in my chest and put a balloon in my aorta," Bradford said, and despite everything, he managed a weak grin. "But alive, definitely alive. My dad's going to lose his mind when I tell him about this." 0:32 on the timer. Harper turned her attention to Commander Cross. He'd been watching the whole thing with eyes that looked more alert than they had any right to be given his blood loss. "That was beautiful, Harp," Cross said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just like old times. Except we had more people shooting at us in Syria." "Don't get nostalgic on me yet, Mitchell," Harper said, crawling over to examine his wounds more closely. "Your turn." She pulled back the field dressing that someone had packed against his abdomen. The shrapnel wounds were still bleeding, though not arterially. She packed them with fresh gauze and applied pressure, knowing it was a temporary measure at best. "You need surgery," Harper said bluntly. "Real surgery in a real operating room with real surgeons who know what they're doing, not a flight nurse with a trauma bag and a crashed helicopter." "Bradford first," Cross said, his voice firm despite his obvious weakness. "Get him stable, get him out, then worry about me. Mitchell, that's an order, Commander." Cross smiled, and even pale and bleeding, and possibly dying, there was steel in his eyes. "Some things don't change. Chain of command is one of them." 0:00 on the timer. Bradford was still breathing. His oxygen saturation had climbed to 93%. His blood pressure was holding steady. The Rebo balloon was doing its job. "Diaz," Harper said, "we need extraction for these two now. Who's flying out casualties?" "That would be me, ma'am." Captain Thorne appeared from the darkness like a ghost materializing. He'd fast roped down, while Harper was working so focused on her patients that she hadn't even noticed. "Both critical patients are stable for transport," Harper said, shifting immediately into mission mode. "But we need to move fast. Bradford has maybe 30 minutes before the Rebo starts causing ischemic damage to his lower extremities. Cross needs an operating room within the hour, or he's not going to make it." "Seattle Grace is 28 minutes out by air," Thorne said. Harper felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Seattle Grace, the hospital that had fired her 6 hours ago, where Dr. Marcus Sterling would be finishing his shift, where she'd be walking back in with the United States Marine Corps at her back, and 2 dying Marines who needed immediate surgery. "Then let's not waste time," Harper said. The extraction was controlled chaos, orchestrated by people who trained for exactly this kind of nightmare. 2 Blackhawks descended into the canyon while the 3rd remained on station overhead, providing cover fire with its door gunners. Bradford and Cross were loaded onto litters and hoisted up to the hovering aircraft 60 feet above, spinning slowly on the winch cables like figures in some macabre ballet. Harper went up with them, her hands never leaving Bradford's IV line, her eyes constantly checking the REBOA balloon placement via the portable ultrasound she'd clipped to her vest. The flight back to Seattle was a blur of controlled urgency. Harper worked on both patients simultaneously, adjusting Cross's IV drip, monitoring Bradford's vitals, checking for signs that the REBOA was causing problems, all while the helicopter banked and climbed and dove through weather that was getting worse by the minute. She heard the radio exchange through her headset. "Seattle Grace Tower, this is Marine Flight 119er. We have 2 critical patients requiring immediate surgical intervention, requesting emergency landing authorization on your helipad." There was a pause, then a voice Harper recognized as belonging to the night shift air traffic coordinator, a man she'd shared many shifts with. "Negative, Marine Flight. You need to divert to Harborview Medical Center. We cannot accommodate military aircraft at this time. Hospital policy." Thorne's voice cut in cold and hard as frozen steel. "Seattle Grace Tower, this is Captain Slade Thorne, United States Marine Corps. I have 2 Marines with life-threatening injuries requiring immediate surgical care. One is the son of General Von Bradford. You will clear your helipad. You will prep your trauma bays. You will provide immediate surgical care. This is not a request. This is notification of a federal emergency operation. Comply or face the consequences." Another pause, longer this time. Harper could imagine the chaos at the hospital, the coordinator calling the administrator on duty, frantic discussions about liability and policy. Then a different voice, older, nervous, Director Finch. "This is Director Harold Finch, Seattle Grace Hospital. Captain Thorne, there are protocols. We need proper authorization from Director Finch. I'm authorizing you right now under Title 10 of the United States Code and the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. If you refuse emergency medical care to these Marines, I will personally ensure that Seattle Grace loses every dollar of federal funding it receives. I will ensure that the Navy Medical Board investigates every single medical decision your trauma department has made in the last 5 years. And I will make absolutely certain that everyone, the media, the medical community, the public knows that you refused to help when American service members were dying. Now clear the pad." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. "Clearing the pad now, Captain. We'll be ready for you." Harper allowed herself a small grim smile. The Black Hawk descended toward Seattle. Grace's rooftop helipad, as dawn was breaking over the Cascades. The sun was just starting to paint the rain clouds gold and orange, turning the wet city below into something almost beautiful. Through the helicopter's windows, Harper could see the figures waiting on the roof. Medical staff in scrubs and white coats, security personnel looking nervous and out of their depth, and standing slightly apart from everyone else, his white coat brilliant against the gray morning, Dr. Marcus Sterling. The wheels touched down. The crew chief slid the door open before the rotors had even begun to slow. Cold morning air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of rain and jet fuel and the city waking up. Harper jumped out first, her left leg nearly buckling, but she forced it to hold. Captain Thorne and his Marines followed, lifting the litters with the smooth efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. "Trauma Bay 1 for Bradford," Harper shouted over the rotor wash, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed in crisis situations. "Trauma Bay 2 for Cross. I need a vascular surgeon and a trauma surgeon standing by. Now." She started toward the roof access door, limping, but moving with purpose. Dr. Sterling stepped into her path, his face twisted with anger and something that might have been fear. "You," he said, his voice shaking, "you're fired. You can't just walk back in here and—" Harper walked past him without breaking stride, without even acknowledging his presence. Captain Thorne didn't. The big Marine smoothly interposed himself between Harper and Sterling, one hand resting casually on the grip of his sidearm. "Doctor," Thorne said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter, but carrying an unmistakable edge of menace. "I strongly suggest you step aside and let the medical professionals work." Sterling's eyes went to the gun, then to the 4 other Marines flanking the litters, all of them armed, all of them looking at Sterling like he was an interesting species of insect. Then to the Black Hawk behind them, its door gunner clearly visible with his hands on the M240 machine gun. He stepped aside. The trauma bays erupted in controlled chaos the moment they wheeled Bradford and Cross through the doors. Harper barked orders like she'd never left, like the 7 years of being invisible had never happened, like she'd been doing this her entire life because she had. "Reagan," Harper spotted the red-haired nurse and felt a surge of relief. "Set up for chest tube insertion on Bradford and Page vascular surgery. I need that Reboe balloon removed in the next 15 minutes, or we're going to start seeing ischemic damage to his lower extremities." Reagan's eyes were wide, staring at Harper in her blood-soaked flight suit with her wind-swept hair and mud-streaked face, looking like she'd just walked out of a war zone, which she had. "Harper," Reagan whispered. "What? How? You're wearing a uniform, and there are Marines with guns and—" "Not now, Reagan. Please. I need you to focus. Can you do that for me?" Reagan blinked, then nodded sharply. Yes, ma'am." She ran toward the supply room. Dr. Sterling had followed them into the trauma bay. He stood in the doorway, his face purple with rage, watching Harper work with an expression that mixed fury and disbelief and something that might have been dawning horror. "This is my department," Sterling said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You can't just waltz in here after being fired and start giving orders like, 'Shut up, Marcus.'" The voice came from the hallway. Everyone turned. Director Harold Finch walked in, followed by a man in military dress uniform, an older man with silver hair and stars on his shoulders, 4 of them. The trauma bay went absolutely silent. Even the monitors seemed to beep more quietly. General Von Bradford stood in the doorway, looking at his son on the gurney, looking at the chest tube, looking at the IV lines and the monitors and the organized chaos of a trauma team working to save a life. Then he looked at Harper. "You're Angel 6, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Harper replied, not stopping her work, her hands busy adjusting Bradford's oxygen flow. "My son told the medics in that canyon that he wouldn't let anyone touch him until you arrived. Is that true?" "Yes, sir." General Bradford nodded slowly, his jaw working. He was right to wait. "Thank you for bringing him home." He turned to Director Finch, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Director, I need a word with you. In your office, now." Finch looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "General, I'm not sure this is the appropriate time to—" "Now." They left. Sterling started to follow, but Thorne caught his arm in a grip that looked casual but made Sterling wince. "Not you, Doctor," Thorne said pleasantly. "You stay right here where we can see you." The vascular surgeon arrived, Dr. Patricia Chen, one of the best in the city, someone Harper had always respected. She took one look at the Reboe placement on the ultrasound, then looked at Harper with undisguised admiration. "You placed this in the field in a canyon in the dark." "Yes, ma'am." "That's exceptional work, Commander. I'll take it from here. Or 2 is being prepped now." Commander Cross was being stabilized in the adjacent bay. Harper briefed the trauma surgeon, a competent older man named Dr. Robertson, who she'd always liked on Cross's injuries, the timeline, the probable organ involvement. "He needs exploratory laparotomy as soon as possible," Harper said. "Multiple shrapnel fragments, probable liver and bowel involvement, significant blood loss." "We'll take good care of him," Robertson promised. "You did good work keeping him alive this long." Harper stepped back. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline that had sustained her for the past 6 hours finally starting to ebb. She'd been going for almost 24 hours straight. No sleep, no food, just coffee and rain and blood and the absolute certainty that people needed her. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the exhaustion wash over her in waves. When she opened them, the entire emergency room staff was staring at her. Not just the staff in the trauma bays. Everyone. Nurses from other floors who'd heard what was happening and come down to watch. Residents in their short white coats. Attending physicians. Even the environmental services staff. The people who cleaned the hospital were standing in the corridors watching the blood-covered woman in the flight suit who'd just performed combat medicine in their sterile hospital. Dr. Sterling pushed through the crowd, his face contorted with anger and something darker. "You had no authority to do any of this," he said, his voice shaking. "You're not employed here. You performed medical procedures without authorization. You violated every protocol we have. This is what competence looks like, Marcus." Harper interrupted, her voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "I performed procedures I'm certified and trained to perform. I saved 2 Marines who would have died without immediate intervention. I did my job." "Your job?" Sterling's laugh was high and brittle. "Your job was mopping floors. Your job was—" "My job," Harper said, taking a step toward him, "was saving lives when people like you were too arrogant or too incompetent to do it yourself. That was my job in the Navy for 19 years. That was my job last night when I saved Daniel Marsh while you were flirting with a drug rep. And that was my job this morning when I saved Corporal Bradford and Commander Cross." The room was absolutely silent except for the ambient beeping of monitors. Sterling's face had gone from purple to white. "You can't talk to me like that. You can't." "I can, and I will," Harper said. "Because someone needs to tell you the truth, Marcus. You're not a bad surgeon. You could actually be quite good if you ever got over yourself long enough to learn. But you care more about being right than being competent. You care more about your ego than your patients. And that's why you'll never be the surgeon you think you are." The elevator dinged. The doors opened. General Bradford stepped out, Director Finch following, like a man walking to his own execution. Behind them was another man, older, silver hair, expensive suit that screamed money and power. Harper recognized him from news broadcasts and campaign commercials. Senator Richard Sterling, Marcus Sterling's father. The senator's eyes found his son, then found Harper, then went cold and calculating. "Marcus," Senator Sterling said quietly, "we need to talk. Now." But General Bradford spoke first, his voice carrying through the emergency room with the authority of a man used to commanding thousands. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general said, "I want you to know who saved my son's life this morning." He gestured to Harper standing there in her blood-soaked flight suit, looking more like a soldier than a nurse. "Lieutenant Commander Harper Gallagher, United States Navy, 19 years of service, 312 combat medevac missions. Recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat." His voice got harder steel beneath the words. "In 2018 in Syria, she crawled into a burning Humvee with a shattered leg to pull my friend Commander Mitchell Cross from certain death. She tourniqueted her own leg while dragging him to safety through enemy fire. She saved his life at the cost of her own health and military career." The general's voice rang through the silent emergency room. "And last night, this hospital fired her for saving a 17-year-old boy's life, fired her because she made a doctor look bad by being more competent than he was." Every eye in the room turned to Dr. Sterling, who had gone absolutely white. "That doctor," the general continued, and his voice could have cut glass, "is Marcus Sterling, who, according to the Navy records I just reviewed in Director Finch's office with Senator Sterling present, washed out of military medical training 12 years ago. Not for lack of skill, he had skill, but for gross arrogance, inability to follow protocols, and being, and I quote from the final evaluation, a danger to any unit he would serve with in combat conditions." Senator Sterling's face had turned to stone, but he didn't interrupt. Couldn't interrupt. Not when a 3-star general was speaking. "That evaluation," General Bradford continued, "was written by then-Lieutenant Commander Harper Gallagher, who tried to mentor Dr. Sterling, who gave him multiple chances to correct his behavior, who finally, when patient safety was at risk, did what she had to do and wrote an honest assessment of his capabilities." The general turned to look at Sterling directly, And you never forgave her for that, did you, doctor? You blamed her for your failures. And when you saw her name on an employment application 7 years ago, you made sure she got the lowest position this hospital had to offer. You spent 7 years punishing her for telling the truth about you. Sterling opened his mouth, but no words came out. His father's hand was on his shoulder, gripping hard. General Senator Sterling said carefully, "My son is a highly qualified trauma surgeon. Whatever issues he may have had in the past, your son," General Bradford interrupted, "nearly killed 2 patients in the last 12 hours. Daniel Marsh, age 17, who would have died if Commander Gallagher hadn't intervened against Dr. Sterling's direct orders. And my son, Corporal Ethan Bradford, who refused treatment from anyone except Commander Gallagher because I had told him that if he was ever in real trouble, Angel 6 was the only person he should trust with his life." The general's voice softened slightly. "I told my son those stories, Senator, about Syria, about what Commander Gallagher did. I told him because I wanted him to understand what true courage and competence look like. I wanted him to know that real heroes don't always wear dress uniforms and give speeches. Sometimes they limp. Sometimes they work night shifts. Sometimes they're invisible until the moment when someone desperately needs them." He turned to Director Finch. "I've spoken with the Navy Medical Board. They're opening a formal investigation into Dr. Sterling's conduct and medical decisions. I've also spoken with representatives from the Department of Defense. Seattle Grace Hospital will be undergoing a complete review of its hiring practices, quality control measures, and treatment protocols." Finch looked like he might be sick. "As for Commander Gallagher," the general said, "she's being offered a position as Chief Medical Instructor at the Joint Special Operations Combat Medic School at Fort Bragg, rank of full colonel, effective immediately if she'll accept it." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Colonel. They were offering Harper a promotion 2 ranks above where she'd left the service, one of the most prestigious teaching positions in military medicine. A role that would shape the next generation of combat medics who would save thousands of lives. Harper stood there exhausted and overwhelmed and unable to process what was happening. "General," Harper said slowly, "I appreciate the offer more than I can say, but I need to think about—" "Of course," the general said. "Take your time. The offer stands." Director Finch stepped forward, his face desperate. "Commander Gallagher, if you would consider staying at Seattle Grace, we could offer you the position of Director of Emergency Medicine. Full authority over the department, complete autonomy, whatever you want. We made a terrible mistake, and we'd like the opportunity to correct it." Harper looked at Finch. At this man who'd chosen politics over patients just hours ago, who'd fired her for doing the right thing because it was easier than standing up to a senator's son. "You fired me 12 hours ago," Harper said flatly. "You told me I violated protocols, that I was just a nurse who didn't know her place. That was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. We would very much like to—" "No," Harper said simply. She turned to the general. "I'll take the teaching position, sir, on one condition." "Name it." Harper looked at Reagan standing with the other nurses, tears streaming down her face. "Every nurse in this emergency room gets a 20% raise effective immediately, and Reagan McCoy gets promoted to head nurse with full supervisory authority. She stood up for what was right when no one else would. That deserves to be rewarded." Reagan